What happens when a new CEO decides a man who runs 285 facilities no longer fits the vibe? How do you fire the only person who actually understands your fragile new system? 15 minutes before a global sync he warned you not to push? Why did I feel calm when I set my badge on her desk and told her to call her lenders, not IT? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Ethan Cole, and I am 51 years old. For 17 years, I have walked the same long hallways in this building, the way other people walk the streets of their hometown. My title on paper is Global Vice President of Supply Chain, but in practice, I am the man who keeps product moving through 285 facilities without anyone noticing. I like simple things. I arrive before the sun, drink plain coffee from a chipped mug I refuse to replace, and read overnight reports while the building still feels half asleep. By 6:30 in the morning, I am usually alone in the control room. The main wall is covered with giant screens that show maps, live inventory levels, truck locations, and a dozen different dashboards. The younger analysts call it the mission wall. I still call it the board, the same way I did when it was made of paper and magnets. I check each region in silence, look for red or yellow indicators, and fix what I can before anyone else even logs in. This is the part of the job that still feels like work, not theater. Around 8, the noise begins. People pour in with colorful lanyards and new titles on their badges. They talk about podcasts and personal brands. They stand in front of the mission wall and take pictures for internal social channels. I hear pieces of their conversations as I pass by. They say that our new CEO posted another video about disruption. They say that investors love her energy and that this old company finally feels alive. They talk about the future as if it started the day she arrived, and everything before her was just a long mistake. I remember the days before that future. When I joined, her father, Robert Hart, was still CEO. He was not charming, he did not post videos, he had a bad suit and a good memory. He told me once in his small office that the only people who really understand a company are the ones who can walk a warehouse at 3 in the morning and know if things are going wrong just by the sound of the conveyor. I spent years doing that. I missed birthdays and holidays to save shipments and calm angry store managers. Robert knew those stories. His daughter Lila inherited his company but not his habits. The first time I met Lila in person was during a quick tour while her father was still in charge. She walked through the control room with quick steps, a small group of assistants behind her, asking simple questions with heavy judgment inside them. I answered with facts and stayed polite. At the time, I thought she was just another visitor from the front office. I did not know I was looking at my future boss, or at the person who would later call my entire career a vibe problem. On a Monday morning, not long after she became CEO, a calendar alert popped up for a company-wide town hall in the executive boardroom. The subject line said that Lila would share her vision for the next chapter. I expected the usual talk about markets, costs, and maybe a few slides about technology. I did not expect to become an example on the stage. Still, when the time came, I left the control room and walked up with the others. You learn to show your face when a new leader wants a crowd. The boardroom had been remodeled for her style. The lights were brighter, the walls whiter, and a camera on a rail moved slowly along the back, streaming everything to remote offices. Rows of chairs filled the room. Younger managers and new directors sat near the front. People like me, who had been here before the paint dried, stayed in the middle or near the back. I sat at the end of a row, not hiding, but not trying to be noticed. The mission wall was still in my mind. I kept one eye on my phone for alerts. When Lila walked in, the room burst into applause. She wore the kind of outfit you see in business magazines. She thanked everyone for their hard work in what she called a challenging, exciting time. She said that her father built a strong base, but that the company needed new air and new blood to survive. She spoke about digital transformation, cloud platforms, and speed. Her voice had that bright tone that makes people sit up, even if they do not understand the details. After the warm parts, she moved to what she called hard truths. She said that some of our old ways of working were holding us back. She mentioned slow sign-offs, cautious thinking, and what she called spreadsheet culture. She said that in her father's time, spreadsheets were heroic, but now they were signs of fear. While she said this, the camera moved along the back of the room, and several heads turned in my direction, not subtle at all. A few people smiled in that nervous way people smile when they recognize a joke but do not want to seem cruel. She did not say my name. She did not need to. She talked about wanting leaders who brought a new energy into rooms, who lit people up, who could turn any problem into an inspiring story. She said that if someone's energy dragged a room down, it did not matter how much they had done in the past. The message was clear. Results were important, but only if they came packaged in the right mood. I sat still, hands folded, listening to my own work described as a weight around her new brand. When she opened the floor for questions, a junior manager from marketing stood and spoke into the microphone. He said that recent stockouts in certain regions hurt the brand and that customers did not care about internal excuses. He said that we needed leaders who understood how to move fast and not hide behind old processes. On the screen behind Lila, a slide showed a cartoon warehouse with rusty gears next to a shiny digital cloud. A few people laughed. I knew the real story behind those stockouts. They came from last-minute changes that her team pushed through without checking with us. I could have raised my hand and said that. I did not. The town hall ended with music and another round of applause. People filed out in small groups, talking about how exciting the next phase would be. As I walked down the hallway, one younger director clapped me on the shoulder and said, half joking and half serious, that we old guys had to learn new tricks. He said that the vibe in the room had to match the vibe on the street. I smiled because that is what you do when you are supposed to take a hint and not a hit. Back in the control room, the mission wall did not care about anyone's energy. A regional hub had already slipped into yellow while we were clapping. A storm in one state and a minor software glitch in another region combined into a mess. I took off my jacket, rolled up my sleeves, and started making calls. While I spoke with a line supervisor about rerouting trucks, I could hear laughter from a nearby pod where two analysts watched a replay of Lila's speech on their screens. One of them said that this place finally felt alive. I looked at the wall of moving dots and thought about how alive those would feel if we stopped watching them for 5 minutes. By the time I left the office that evening, the building was almost empty. The sun was gone, and the windows showed my own tired reflection. In the parking lot, I passed a group of younger employees heading to the bar next door, still buzzing about the town hall. One of them said that the company was finally done with dead weight. He did not look at me when he said it. He did not need to. I drove home in silence. The radio stayed off. When I walked into our kitchen, the smell of garlic and onions greeted me. My wife, Ruth, stood at the stove stirring a pot. She looked up, saw my face, and did not ask if it had been a good day. She asked how bad. I told her about the speech. I told her that the new CEO had spoken about old spreadsheets and bad vibes and how people who did not match the energy of the room would not have a place for long. I told her how people had turned to look at me when she said those words. Ruth leaned on the counter and listened, eyebrows drawn together. She said that it sounded like they were using a new word to say an old thing that they were calling experience a problem because it reminded them of limits. She said that if they wanted someone to cheer while the ship hit rocks, they could hire an actor. She also said that she did not want to watch me shrink a little more each time a younger manager made a joke about my age right in front of me. Her voice stayed gentle, but it carried more heat than the stove. We ate dinner, talking about small things for a while. Afterward, I washed the dishes, and she dried them, the way we always did. When she went to the living room to read, I sat back down at the kitchen table with my laptop. I told myself I only wanted to check a few numbers before bed, maybe send one note to a regional manager about the storm. Habits form grooves in the mind. It is hard to climb out of them. My inbox was full of unread messages from the day. Internal newsletters, meeting recaps, follow-up surveys about engagement. Near the top, one subject line stood out in bright blue letters. It said there would be a global sync celebration next month at 1:30 in the afternoon. The body of the message talked about a new era, a seamless move to a unified cloud platform, a live stream from the executive boardroom, and special guests from our main lenders. There was a short video showing animated trucks gliding across a digital map without friction or delay. I watched the clip and felt a slow tightness in my chest. I knew enough about our current systems to understand that a single, one-shot cutover at the same time across 285 facilities was not a celebration. It was a dare. You can replace parts of a plane while it is flying if you go slow and careful. You cannot turn off all the engines at once and trust a new design because it looks nice on a slide. The email did not show any details about rollback plans. It only promised a perfect future. I closed the video and sat back. My fingers tapped the table in a steady rhythm. After a moment, I opened my calendar. The same event was already there, blocked off from 1 to 2 in the afternoon. Under the title, small gray text said that attendance was mandatory for leadership and that operations heads would be in the boardroom with Lila while the rest watched from their departments. I stared at the screen, thinking about the mission wall, the real world beyond the slides, and the way her speech had turned my life's work into a mood problem. I was about to shut the laptop when my phone, sitting face down beside the mug, started to buzz. The sound against the wooden table was sharp in the quiet kitchen. I turned it over. A notification from the same calendar app glowed on the screen. The date of the global sync was circled in red, and a new reminder line had appeared below it, in small, precise text. Global cutover. System sync 1:30 p.m. Attendance mandatory. The red circle on my screen sat there like a small warning light. I stared at the words about the global cutover until the letters blurred. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed. Ruth was already asleep. I lay beside her in the dark and listened to the quiet house. My mind kept walking through warehouses and data centers, trying to picture what a one-shot system sync would look like in real time. I did not sleep much. The next few days moved in the usual rhythm. I woke before dawn, drove in half light, and walked into a building that felt less and less like the place I joined years ago. The lobby now had bright banners about disruption and courage. The old framed photos of our first distribution centers had been replaced with digital screens showing abstract graphics and motivational phrases. I passed them without slowing down and went straight to the control room. In the control room, the night team left as I arrived. They greeted me with small nods. They knew I would check their work, but not humiliate them for mistakes. I scanned the mission wall. Europe was green. The East Coast had a small delay because of storms. The West Coast was smooth. It looked clean, but I knew how fragile it was behind the icons. At 9 that morning, I left for a regional visit. Lila's people like to say that everything could be understood from dashboards, but I still went to facilities in person. You cannot hear a conveyor belt's wrong rhythm from a slide deck. I drove to the airport, passed through security, and sat at the gate with my laptop open on my knees. An email from Central Planning described a new aggressive staffing model for the warehouse I was about to visit. The tone of the message was bright and confident. The numbers were sharp and tight. The safety margins were invisible. On the plane, my mind slid back to another trip to that same building years earlier. Back then, the place was on the edge of collapse during a holiday season. Trucks lined up in the parking lot, pallets piled up in random corners, workers looked exhausted and confused. Robert had called me into his office and asked if I could fix it. He said that if anyone could, it would be the man who liked walking warehouses at 3 a.m. There had been no cameras in his office that day, only 2 men who understood that if the network failed, the company failed. I remembered arriving at that old version of the facility in the middle of the night. The air had smelled like dust and oil. Supervisors kept saying that the schedule was impossible. We had stood on a metal platform and looked down at a mess of boxes and flashing lights. I spent 3 days on that floor, walking lines, talking with workers, drawing new flow paths on scrap paper. I slept in a small office on a folding cot. When it was done, the backlog was gone and the trucks rolled on time. After that crisis, Robert had called me again. He thanked me in simple words. He said the company owed me more than a bonus or a speech. He promised that if anyone ever tried to blame me for doing my job the right way, he would stand between me and the noise. At the time, I believed that promise more than I believed any formal policy. In my mind, his word was a wall. Now, sitting on the plane years later, I wondered if that wall still existed or if it had been painted over with the same bright slogans I walked past each morning. When I reached the regional facility this time, the building looked cleaner and more modern. The logos were updated, the signs freshly printed. Inside, the staff recognized me. Some of them had more gray hair now. They shook my hand and asked if I was there because something was wrong. I told them I was there for a routine review, but added that I wanted to hear if anything felt off before the new system cut over. Their faces changed at that word. In a small office overlooking the floor, the site manager pulled up the new staffing and schedule plans. He said that corporate had pushed the numbers down from above and that he had raised concerns. He said his concerns had been softened by the time they traveled back up through the chain. He described near misses during a recent test, barcode scans dropping out for minutes at a time, workers forced to handle double loads to catch up. He said that on paper, his site looked like it had hit the targets. On the floor, people were going home with aches and near injuries. I walked the floor with him and listened to supervisors. They spoke quietly but clearly. They said that if the new system froze for even half an hour during peak hours, the building would back up in ways that took days to unwind. They said that the current plan left no room for error. None of this surprised me. I had felt the same during the crisis years ago. The difference now was that back then leadership had respected the feeling. Now leadership respected animated videos. I asked them to log every incident, every freeze, every overtime hour added because of tech glitches. I said it might matter later. I did not explain why. I did not promise that anyone up the chain would listen. I simply told them that numbers are harder to ignore when they are written down. On the way back to the airport that evening, my phone buzzed with a message from one of the younger managers at headquarters. He said that Lila had just posted a video about the upcoming global sync. In the clip, she stood in front of the mission wall talking about how we were days away from a clean, elegant transition that would show the world how agile we were. Behind her, the same red and yellow indicators I chased each day were blurred into a soft background glow. The comments under the video said that she was a visionary and that the company had never felt more alive. My flight was delayed, so I sat in a plastic airport chair and watched the video twice. The second time, I focused on the date and time in the corner. It matched the calendar reminder exactly. There was no mention of backup plans, no talk of gradual rollouts, just confidence and shiny music. I felt tired in a way that sleep would not fix. When I finally got home that night, Ruth was already in bed. I moved quietly through the house, hung my jacket, and stood in the doorway of our bedroom for a moment, watching her breathe. Then I went to the small room we used as a home office and turned on the light. The shelves in that room held years of binders, old manuals, and boxes with faded labels. I did not have the energy to go through them yet. Instead, I sat at the small desk, opened my laptop, and wrote down what I had heard at the facility, the near misses, the odd incidents, the way the site manager's voice had sounded when he said the schedule did not match reality. I did not send this to anyone. I saved it in a simple text file with a date in the name. It felt like dropping a small stone into a jar. Over the next week, the pattern repeated. By day, I kept the network stable. By night, I added stones to the jar. I wrote down when new policies arrived from above that increased pressure without adding resources. I noted each time someone called me negative for pointing out obvious gaps. I logged the dates of every test run and every strange glitch people mentioned but tried to laugh off. The file on my laptop grew, line by line. Meanwhile, the culture around me shifted in louder ways. In one meeting, a young director from Lila's circle stood in front of the mission wall and talked about how our goal was not just reliable deliveries, but exciting ones. He said that our operations had to have better vibes. He said that customers could feel the energy behind a brand. I waited for him to mention the trucks, the long nights, the people on the floor. He did not. Later that week, I joined a small group in the executive boardroom for a rehearsal presentation. Lila wanted her leadership team to practice telling the story of the cutover to lenders. On the screen behind her, charts showed how the new system would reduce errors and increase speed. The timelines looked perfect. No mention of near misses, no sign of the red and yellow flashes I watched every morning. During the feedback round, I asked if we had a written plan for what would happen if a region failed to sync. I kept my tone calm, not dramatic. Lila smiled in the polite way people smile at a child asking a naive question. She said that the team had it under control and that focusing on disaster scenarios in front of lenders would damage confidence. She said that leaders needed to project certainty. A few people around the table nodded. I nodded too, but not for the same reason. One evening, after a long day of meetings like that, I stopped by the bar next to the office. I do not usually drink with coworkers, but I needed a moment before driving home. The place was half full of people from the building. I recognized a group of younger managers from product and strategy at a table near the back. I took a seat at the bar, ordered a soda, and tried not to listen. Their voices carried anyway. They talked about the global sync as if it were a movie premiere. One of them said that this was Lila's big moment and that her father had never managed to pull off something so bold. Another said the board and lenders would be watching and that once it was done, the company would be free of what he called legacy overhead. Someone asked what that meant. He replied that it meant people who still thought in lines and pallets instead of platforms and vibes. My name came up then. One of them said that I was a decent guy but stuck in another era. He said that once the system went live, there would be less need for people like me. He joked that the company would probably give me a gentle package and a nice speech. The table laughed. I stared at the bubbles in my glass and felt something settle inside me. It was not a sudden rage. It was a slow, heavy clarity. When I stepped out of the bar, the evening air felt colder than it should have. I walked to my car and sat for a moment without starting the engine. I thought about the near misses, the ignored warnings, the speech about vibes, and the way my name had turned into a punchline for people who could not have fixed a single failed truck route on their own. I turned the key and drove home in silence again. At home, Ruth listened as I told her what I had heard. She shook her head and said that they were playing with things they did not understand. She said that if a hospital ran its systems the way my company was planning to run its network, she would walk out. She reminded me that she did not marry me for my title and that she would rather adjust our life than watch me be slowly erased. When she went to bed, I went back to the home office and opened my laptop. I added another line to my growing file, this time about the conversation in the bar. I saved it and closed the lid. I was about to turn off the light when my work phone lying on the desk lit up. The screen showed a new calendar invitation. The title of the meeting was short and bright. It said there would be a quick culture chat with Monica from HR. The date sat in the same week as the first full cutover rehearsal. The phrase quick culture chat stayed on my phone screen as I drove home that night. It sounded friendly, almost harmless, like someone inviting me for coffee. I knew it was not harmless. HR does not block time during the week of a full cutover rehearsal to ask about my favorite hobbies. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove in silence. The lights of other cars moved past like small white ghosts. Ruth was watching something quietly in the living room when I came in. I told her there would be a meeting with HR next week. I said the subject line mentioned culture. She raised an eyebrow and asked if that meant they wanted to talk about my energy. I said that was likely. She reminded me that companies often use soft words for hard decisions. She said that if they started talking about vibes, I should listen to what they were really saying behind the soft terms. The day of the meeting, I walked through the lobby feeling like I was heading toward a performance instead of a conversation. The HR conference room sat near the back of the floor, away from the main traffic. Inside, the walls were painted a neutral color and decorated with vague art. There was a small round table in the center with 3 chairs. Monica from HR sat in one of them, a tablet in front of her. She smiled as I walked in, the kind of smile that looks warm but never reaches the eyes. She started by thanking me for coming and saying that she wanted to check in about how I was feeling during this exciting time. She used words like transformation and journey. She said that brave change could feel uncomfortable for legacy leaders. Then she shifted. She brought up feedback she said she had collected from other departments. She said that some people saw me as negative in meetings, that I often pointed out risks when others wanted to focus on possibilities. She said that this could bring the energy of a room down. I listened. I thought about all the nights I had sat in rooms where alarms were going off, and the only energy anyone cared about was the energy it took to move pallets faster. Monica went on. She said that the company under Lila valued not just results, but vibes. She actually used that word. She said that leaders needed to inspire, not just deliver. She added that some people felt my presence did not fully match the brand's new direction. Then she slid a thin brochure across the table. She said that after the global cutover, there would be likely adjustments to leadership structure. She said that sometimes people who had given a lot found that their path inside the company was complete. She mentioned transition support, coaching, and how the organization wanted to honor contributions while making space for fresh voices. She did not say the words, "We want you out." She did not need to. I asked her calmly if there were any concrete issues with my work, with numbers, with deliveries. She hesitated, then said that my track record was strong, but that culture was now just as important. She repeated that my energy did not always match where Lila wanted to go. She suggested that it would be good if I could show more visible excitement about the cutover in upcoming sessions. She said that people would be watching. I thanked her for the feedback and said I understood what she was telling me. I did not pick up the brochure. I left it on the table when I stood. Her eyes flicked down to it, then back to my face. She said that HR liked to be involved early so that transitions were smooth. I walked out of the room with the sense that a decision had already been made in some small hallway conversation, and this meeting was just the polite cover. Later that same day, I was scheduled to sit in the IT war room during a final review of the global sync plan. The war room was a long, low room filled with screens showing server status, message queues, and test environments. Priya, the CIO, stood near a whiteboard at the front, surrounded by external consultants and internal engineers. Lila was not there physically, but her name sat at the top of the slide deck on the main screen. The consultants walked through the cut-over plan. They spoke about switching from the old systems to the new cloud platform in one unified move at 1:30 p.m. They showed colorful flows and arrows moving smoothly between boxes labeled order, inventory, billing. They said that the last rehearsal had gone well enough and that any issues would be ironed out by launch day. The words well enough made me sit up a little straighter. When they opened the floor for comments, I asked about rollback. I asked where in their plan the exit ramp was if a region failed to sync or if transaction queues jammed. One consultant said that rollback added complexity and could confuse stakeholders. Another said that the business had asked for a clean cut to avoid mixed reporting. Priya looked tired as she listened. She did not meet my eyes. I pointed to a section of their timeline where all 285 facilities were scheduled to move at once. I mentioned the near misses at the regional center I had just visited and the extra stress on scanners and staff during the last test. I asked if their plan assumed perfect network stability and perfect data quality. They said that the tests had shown acceptable risk and that nothing was ever truly perfect. Someone at the table suggested that focusing on failure scenarios might send the wrong message to leadership. There it was again, the idea that saying a thing out loud might cause it, like speaking an illness into existence. I looked around the room and saw young engineers watching the exchange, some nodding quietly at my questions, others glancing nervously at Priya. She finally spoke. She said that the plan had been approved at the highest level and that our job now was to execute. She added that escalation protocols would be in place. She did not say what those protocols were. I knew then that if something went wrong at 1:30, I would be one of the names people brought up first. It would not matter that I had asked about rollback or raised concerns about near misses. The story would be that operations could not handle the new world. They had already decided that the problem was my mindset. The facts would be shaped to match that belief. When I left the war room, the hallway felt narrower. I went back to the control room, checked the mission wall, and finished my actual work for the day. On the surface, nothing had changed. Trucks still moved. Orders still flowed. Underneath, a line had been crossed. They were no longer just ignoring risk. They were building a story where risk itself was a flaw in my character. That evening, I drove home with my hands tight on the wheel. Ruth noticed the tension in my shoulders as soon as I walked in. I told her about the HR meeting and how Monica had talked about my energy as if it were a performance review metric. I described the cutover discussion in the war room. I told her how rollback had been pushed aside because it did not fit a clean narrative. She listened, then said that they were asking me to stand under a falling roof and smile for the camera. After dinner, I went to the small room we called the office, then kept going, through a door that led into the garage. The garage was half storage, half museum. Old tools hung on hooks. Boxes lined the walls with faded labels from projects long finished. Somewhere in this room was the life I had lived before someone decided that my value could be judged by my enthusiasm in meetings. I started opening boxes. Most held old manuals, plant layouts, and printed reports. In one, I found a faded baseball cap from a DC I had helped open. In another, a stack of laminated flowcharts from routing projects long replaced by newer software. Near the back, under a crate of winter gear, I found a flat, slim box that I did not recognize right away. I pulled it out and opened the lid. Inside was a simple folder, thicker than a single sheet but thinner than a binder. On the front, in careful handwriting, was Robert Hart's name, and under it, my own. The sight of that handwriting pulled me back to a different time, when he would call me into his office not for a performance show, but to ask what reality looked like past the slides. I took the folder to the small workbench and opened it. I will not describe every line. It is enough to say that it contained notes from an internal incident years ago, when something had gone wrong and the company needed someone who would tell the truth even when it hurt. It described my role in that process and mentioned certain protections. It referred, in quiet, dry language, to how my cooperation in internal matters should be treated. It was not flashy. It did not speak about vibes. It spoke about duty. For a long time, I stood there in the cold garage reading those pages. The words were familiar and new at the same time. Back when Robert gave me that folder, I had seen it as a shield against unfair blame in one specific situation. Now, with Monica's smile still in my mind and the consultant's confident slides fresh in my memory, I saw it differently. It looked less like a relic and more like a piece of ground that had not yet been dug up by the new culture. I did not rush to show it to anyone. I did not take pictures or send emails. Instead, I closed the folder and placed it on the workbench next to my laptop. I opened the laptop and created a new file. At the top, I wrote a simple title, Cutover Risk, Timeline. I added the date of the first announcement, the day of the HR meeting, and the war room review. I left space under each line to fill in details later. Then I reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, unused USB drive I had picked up at a conference years earlier. I set it on the workbench next to the folder and the laptop. The three objects looked ordinary: a folder, a cheap piece of plastic, and a black rectangle of metal. None of them matched the bright colors in Lila's videos. None of them cared about vibes. I turned off the overhead light and stood for a moment in the dim glow from the laptop screen. In that half light, the edges of the folder and the USB caught a faint shine. I was not yet planning anything grand. I was not imagining revenge. I was simply refusing, quietly, to stand under that falling roof alone and empty-handed. My hand moved the cursor and saved the empty timeline file. The laptop screen went dark. The last thing visible on the workbench was the notebook with one phrase written at the top in my own handwriting: Cut over risk, timeline. The words cut over risk, timeline stayed in my head the next morning as I drove into work. The highway looked the same gray lanes and red taillights, but I did not feel the same. Nothing big had happened yet. No one knew about the folder in my garage or the empty USB drive. Still, something inside me had shifted. I was done trusting that the people above me would do the right thing just because it was the right thing. In the control room, the mission wall glowed softly in the early light. I checked each region, made a few adjustments, and answered an email from a distribution center about a late rail car. I solved the problem the way I always had: quiet, fast, and without drama. Then, instead of moving on, I opened my laptop and pulled up my new timeline file. I added a few details under the dates I had already written, small notes about who was in each meeting, what was said, and where my questions had been brushed aside. I kept my entries simple. No long speeches, just short lines like test run, Scanners dropped for 8 minutes, concerns noted but ignored, and HR mentioned energy and vibes during discussion about my future. Writing them down made them feel less like random complaints and more like pieces of a pattern. I did not tell anyone I was doing this. I did not need witnesses yet. I needed facts. Later that week, I sat with one of my analysts, Jared, in a small side room off the control floor. Jared is 29, sharp, and still hopeful. He respects the numbers more than the slogans, which is rare these days. He showed me a new performance report he had built for a weekly leadership deck. The raw data on his screen told one story. The slide he had been asked to send told another. He pointed at a graph that showed on-time shipments dipping during recent tests. Then he showed me the edited slide, where the same line looked flatter and healthier. He said that someone from the transformation office had asked him to smooth out noise before submitting it. He told me he was not comfortable with how different it looked from reality. His eyes flicked up to mine as he said it, as if he was checking which side of the world I lived on. I told him quietly to save a copy of the original report somewhere safe. I asked him to email me the raw file as well, just in case we needed to review trends later. I kept my tone casual, as if I was only interested in the detail for my own work. He nodded and said he understood. He did not ask why, he did not have to. The fact that he felt uneasy was already an answer. In the days that followed, small things like this happened more often. A safety report from a facility arrived in my inbox, then a softer version appeared in a general distribution email. A forecast that showed high risk was rewritten with more optimistic wording. Each time I saw a gap between what was real and what was being shared, I made a simple note in my timeline and saved a copy of the clean version where I could find it later. I was not hunting for trouble. I was recording what was already there. I still did my regular job. I still walked the floor, made calls, and sat in meetings. One morning, I joined a video check-in with Priya and the tech leads. They spoke about how the latest test of the new platform had gone. On their slide, there was a line about minor latency issues under investigation. They moved past it quickly to talk about new features. After the call, one of the engineers sent me a private message saying that minor latency had meant entire regions freezing for several minutes, but that the official summary did not want that level of detail. I added the date and his comment to my file. A week later, I flew again to visit another major regional facility. On the plane, I tried to read a book Ruth had suggested, something not related to work. My eyes kept drifting back to the memory of the timeline file on my laptop and the folder with Robert's name in my garage. I wondered what he would say if he saw how his company was being run now. I wondered if he would even recognize it. At the facility, the pattern repeated. The building looked polished. The metrics on the wall monitors looked strong. But when I stepped onto the floor and talked to supervisors, the cracks showed. They told me about system hiccups that happened only during certain shifts, scanners that randomly stopped, and strange delays between order entry and pick lists. They said that the official messages from HQ called these adjustment periods. Their faces said they called them something else. I asked them to keep logging every event, no matter how small, and to send local summaries up the chain. I knew some of those logs would be washed clean by the time they reached the people who made slides. I also knew that local copies tend to stick around in desk drawers and shared drives long after someone tries to tidy the story. I did not ask them to send anything directly to me. That would have made them nervous. I just reminded them that writing things down protects everyone later. On the way back from that trip, my flight had a long delay. I ended up in an airport lounge, the kind where soft music plays and people pretend they are not listening to each other's calls. A group of our younger managers sat 2 tables away. They had laptops open and the company logo visible on their screens. They ordered drinks and spoke louder than they realized. They talked about the upcoming global sync like it was a major product launch. One of them said that if the cutover went smoothly, Lila would be untouchable for years. Another said that the board and lenders were ready to reward her for the guts it took to push this through. Then my name came up again. One manager said that if there were any hiccups, people like Ethan would complain, but that the narrative was set and leadership would not let old fear ruin this moment. Someone else said that after the cutover, there would probably be a leadership refresh in operations, and that it would be less painful for everyone if certain people accepted it with grace. They laughed and ordered another round. I watched them in the reflection on the lounge window, the planes taxiing in the background. I did not stand up. I did not correct them. I simply memorized the sound of their confidence. Back at home a day later, I added another line to my timeline, this one about the airport conversation. Ruth asked why I looked so tired when the trip had been short. I told her that the younger people seemed sure that the story of the cutover was already written, and that in their version, I was either a quiet extra or a cautionary tale. She asked what my version looked like. I said I did not know yet, but that I was making sure the facts would be ready when it was time to tell it. A few days after that, I received an email from an old colleague, Daniel Ross. We had worked together years ago when we were both younger and hungrier. He now worked at a competing logistics firm. His message was brief. He said he had seen public news about our upcoming system launch and wondered how I was holding up. He suggested grabbing coffee sometime near the office. No pressure. We met at a small cafe downtown during my lunch break. The place had simple wooden tables and strong, plain coffee. No inspirational quotes on the wall, which I appreciated. Daniel looked older, like me, but his eyes still had that sharp, steady focus he had on warehouse floors years ago. He asked how things really were inside the company, not the version from press releases. I gave him a careful answer, nothing confidential, just enough to sketch the picture. Heavy pressure to move fast, weak safety margins, a lot of attention on the CEO's image, not enough on the floors. He nodded slowly, as if he already suspected most of it. Then he said something that sat with me. He said that people like us often stayed too long in places that had already decided we were old news. He said that if I ever reached a point where I was ready to leave, there were firms that would value someone who actually understood how to run 285 facilities, with or without flashy language. He did not make a formal offer. He just opened a door and left it there. On my way back to the office, I walked slower than usual. I pictured that open door in my mind next to the door to my current office, the mission wall, and the garage with the folder. I realized I was no longer trapped. I had options, even if I had not decided yet what to do with them. That feeling cleared some of the fog I had been living in. Back at headquarters, the air felt heavier. The cutover date was getting closer. Teams rushed from meeting to meeting. Calendars filled with rehearsals and check-ins. Lila appeared more often on internal screens, talking about courage and speed. In one short video, she stood next to Priya and said that our tech stack was finally catching up with our ambition. Priya smiled thinly. I wondered how she slept at night. That evening in the garage, I opened my timeline file again and filled in more details. Daniel's visit, the airport lounge talk, notes from the latest test reports. I plugged the unused USB drive into my laptop and stared at the empty directory for a moment. Then I closed it without saving anything yet. I still felt that showing any move toward copying files would be a step I should not take lightly. For now, the notes in my own words were enough. The next week, invitations for more meetings started piling up. There were technical walkthroughs, communications planning sessions, and even a workshop about how to talk about the journey during the live stream. I attended what I had to and skipped what I could. I focused on making sure the physical network stayed as stable as human hands could make it. On a Tuesday afternoon, I sat in a cramped meeting room off the executive floor with a small group, reviewing the final schedule for launch day. The plan on the whiteboard showed the order of events: internal pep talk, cutover command, monitoring phase, and then a joint call with our main lenders to show them early metrics. The times were tight, almost arrogant. There was no real buffer between pushing the button and bragging about it. As we were leaving that room, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it until I was back in the control room. Then I pulled it out and saw a new calendar notification. The subject line was longer than usual, bright and confident. It said, Global Sync Launch plus Lender Covenant Update. Boardroom, 1 hour 2 p.m. Live streamed. The meeting title sat in my calendar like a bright sticker on a cracked window. Global Sync Launch Plus, Lender Covenant Update, Boardroom, live streamed, 1 o'clock to 2. I stared at it for a long minute, then closed my phone and went back to the mission wall. Trucks were still moving, orders were still flowing. None of them cared about what time the cameras would turn on. The days leading up to that event felt both busy and strangely slow. Everyone around me seemed to move faster. The transformation office sent more emails about the schedule, the script, the talking points. There were reminders about dress code and camera angles. Someone even suggested that leaders think about how their energy would travel through the lens. No one sent instructions about how to keep inventory tables from locking when 20 regions tried to sync at once. In the control room each morning, I did what I always did. I checked each region, listened to the small alarms, and fixed problems quietly. Between tasks, I opened my timeline file and added more simple lines. Test 4, latency in 3 regions, summary sent. Response, within acceptable risk. HR follow-up. Monica asked again about visible excitement. I wrote without emotion. I did not judge. I just recorded. One night, I sat at the kitchen table with Ruth while she paid bills. The cutover date was less than 2 weeks away. I told her about the latest rehearsal in the boardroom. I described how the slide deck now included a victory lap section, where leaders would talk about the journey for the cameras right after we pressed the button. I told her that there was still no real buffer between the go live and the lender call. She put down her pen and looked at me for a long time. She said that from the outside, it sounded like a hospital scheduling a ribbon cutting and a TV interview before finishing a surgery. She asked me a simple question. If the worst happened at 1:30, who would they blame at 2 or Sar? I did not have to think. I said they would blame operations, they would blame me. They had already started building that story. Ruth nodded slowly. She said she could not tell me how to do my job, but she could tell me what she did not want. She did not want to see me on a screen later, taking responsibility for decisions I had fought against. She did not want a polite speech about how things were a learning experience, while we both knew that people had ignored warnings. She reminded me that we could live in a smaller house, drive an older car, and still be fine. But she did not know how to live with a husband who carried quiet shame around like a stone. Her words settled into me deeper than any memo. That night, after she went to bed, I went back into the garage. I opened the folder with Robert's handwriting and read it again, not for comfort, but for clarity. It did not promise me a happy ending. It promised me something different. That telling the truth about internal risk was not supposed to cost me my job. It spoke about duty and cooperation. It did not mention vibes. I closed the folder and set it beside my laptop. Then I opened my timeline file and began to clean it up. I turned scattered notes into straight lines: date, place, people, what was said, what happened next. I kept the language simple, like a logbook. I was not writing a speech. I was building a record I could stand behind with a straight face. The next day at work, I got an email from Monica. She wanted a short check-in before launch day. She said it was to make sure leadership felt supported and aligned. She proposed a time on the morning of the cutover. The wording was smooth. I accepted the invite without comment. Then I checked my calendar again and saw the chain of events line up. Her check-in in the morning, last technical huddle, then the joint launch and lender call. All in one tight block. 2 days later, I took a long lunch and walked to the cafe downtown where I had met Daniel. This time, I sat alone for a few minutes, watching people come and go. Then I crossed the street and stepped into a different building. The lobby sign showed the name of Horizon Capital. The air inside smelled like coffee and paper. I did not have a formal appointment with Marcus, the main contact from our lenders. I had a short, simple slot arranged through his assistant. A courtesy check-in, nothing more. They led me to a small conference room with a glass wall and a clear view of the street. Marcus entered with a notebook, no laptop. He shook my hand and said he appreciated me taking the time. We talked about general things first, how the sector was doing, how fuel prices were behaving. He asked politely about the upcoming system launch. I gave him the public version first. Unified platform, faster visibility, long-term savings. He listened, but his eyes stayed sharp. Then he asked what kept me up at night. I did not open my laptop. I did not slide papers across the table. I just spoke as simply as I could. I said that moving 285 facilities to a new platform at the same moment carried more risk than the public messages suggested. I said that some rehearsal tests had shown signs of strain. I said that rollback options had been pushed aside for the sake of a clean story. I also said that I had raised these concerns through internal channels and that they were documented. Marcus did not react with drama. He nodded slowly, took a few notes, and asked if I was comfortable with my name attached to those internal concerns. I said yes. I told him I was not trying to sabotage the launch. I was trying to make sure that if something went wrong, the people with money on the line understood that it was not a surprise to everybody. He thanked me. He said that lenders did not like risk hidden under bright language. He did not promise anything. He did not threaten anything. He simply said he appreciated clarity and that his team would keep that in mind when they watched the launch call. As I stood to leave, he said one more thing. He said that if I ever felt pressure to sign off on something I believed was unsafe, I should remember that documents and dates outlive moods. Back at my own office, I felt strangely lighter. Nothing had changed yet. The cutover was still on the schedule. The same people still sat in the same roles. But now I knew that at least one person outside our walls had heard my concerns in my own words. The story they wanted to tell about me as a fearful relic would not be the only one in circulation. In the final days before launch, the building turned into a stage. There were banners near the elevators with slogans about the new era, the internal social feed filled with behind-the-scenes photos of teams prepping for launch. Someone filmed a short clip of the control room and asked the younger analysts to shout a catchphrase. They did. No one asked me to be in the shot. Priya moved through the halls with a tight smile and tired eyes. In one brief corridor moment, I walked next to her in silence. Then I asked quietly if she was comfortable with the current state of the plan. She paused for half a second before saying that we had to trust the process. I told her that trusting a process was not the same as trusting a schedule. She did not answer that. She just said that we were out of days, and then she walked away. On the night before launch, I left the office later than usual. I stayed to make sure every region started the night in green, even though I knew that by 1:30 the next day, a different set of hands would be on the switch. When I got home, Ruth had already packed away dinner for me. We ate together at the table while she asked simple, direct questions. She asked if I had done everything I could to push for a safer plan. I said yes. She asked if I had written down what I needed to remember. I said yes. She asked if I was ready to walk away if they tried to make me the face of their failure. I hesitated, then also said yes. My voice did not shake when I said it. After dinner, I went to the garage one last time. I placed the folder with Robert's handwriting and my printed timeline into my work bag, then hesitated. I did not plan to wave them around. I only wanted them close if the room turned against me. I checked that the small USB drive was still empty. I left it in the drawer. I had enough with my own memory and words. Launch day began like any other on the surface. The sky was gray, traffic was moderate. I parked in my usual spot and walked toward the building. Inside, the lobby buzzed. There was a small table with pastries and coffee for launch morning. A screen on the wall showed a countdown timer overlaying footage of rolling trucks. I walked past it and went straight to the control room. I spent the first hours making sure there were no fresh fires. I answered calls from facilities that were nervous. I told supervisors to do what they had always done, follow the numbers, not the noise. A few of them asked if I felt good about the cutover. I did not lie. I said that I believed in their work and that I would tell the truth if anyone asked me what I saw. It was the closest I could come to comfort without pretending. At 10, I had a short check-in with Monica. The HR conference room felt smaller than before. She smiled and asked how I was feeling. I told her I was focused on operations. She said this was a big day and that leadership needed to show united excitement. She reminded me that a lot of eyes would be on the boardroom at 1 o'clock. She repeated gently that the company would remember who stood with the new direction and who did not. I listened and nodded. Inside, I felt something else. Not fear this time, but a kind of quiet stubbornness. I thought about Ruth's face at the kitchen table, about Daniel's open door, about Marcus's notes. I thought about the folder in my bag and the years I had given to this company. I decided very clearly that I would not lie today. I would not cover for anyone. I would not shout or throw things. I would just refuse to be the shield. After Monica's chat, I went back to the control room and watched the mission wall for a while. Then I checked the time. It was just after noon. Messages from transformation and comms teams still flowed through my inbox, reminding everyone about the live stream schedule. I closed the email app and picked up my notebook. At 12:30, a final reminder popped up, telling me to be in the executive boardroom by 1 for the joint launch and lender call. Right below it, another notification appeared. This one was from Lila's assistant. It invited me to a quick pre-launch check-in in her office at 12:45. The description said it would be a chance to align messaging before the cameras turned on. I walked down the hallway toward the executive floor with my bag over my shoulder and my badge against my chest. The nearer I came, the quieter the building seemed. People were gathered in conference rooms, screens ready, waiting for the show. The clock on my phone said 12:43 when I turned the corner to Lila's glass-walled office. Through the glass, I could see her at her desk, tablet open, Monica standing to one side. A small digital clock on the credenza behind her showed the countdown to the 1:30 sync in bright numbers. 47 minutes, 46. I took a breath, straightened my shoulders, and reached for the handle. The door clicked softly as I stepped inside and let it close behind me, leaving the hum of the hallway on the other side. Lila did not look up right away when I entered. She sat behind her glass desk with her tablet propped up, Monica standing slightly behind her shoulder with a folder in her hands. The countdown clock on the credenza showed 46 minutes until the cutover. I took the chair opposite the desk and set my notebook on my lap. Lila finally said she was glad I came. She said this was an important day and that she wanted everyone aligned. Then she nodded at Monica. Monica opened the folder and said that, after careful discussion, leadership had decided to refresh operations after the launch. She said they wanted to thank me for my 17 years of service and offer me a transition package. She used words like graceful and legacy. Then she said directly that my energy did not match where the company was going and that my last day would be today. I asked calmly if she was confirming that as of this moment, I no longer held responsibility or authority for the 1:30 cutover. Lila said that after this conversation, I would not. She added that it was better for the brand if people on stage truly believed in the journey. Monica said that if I accepted the package now, they could make the message positive. I let their words hang for a moment. Then I reached for my badge. I took it off and set it on the desk between us, the logo facing her. I told her that in that case, I would not sit in the boardroom as a prop while they pushed a cutover I had formally warned against. I said that, based on the last test runs, the removed rollback, and today's volume, the 130 sync was likely to lock key tables within minutes. I added that she probably had 15 minutes after failure before the lender call turned hostile, and that it would be wise to invite legal and finance in now, instead of explaining later why she fired the one person who refused to sign off. Lila's eyes sharpened. She said I was being dramatic. She said technology always had bumps. Monica's smile disappeared. She said this kind of talk sounded like undermining leadership on launch day. I stayed quiet for a breath, then told them that every concern I had just mentioned already existed in internal risk notes, test summaries, and my own timeline, all dated. I said that at least one of our lenders had heard my concerns in advance in my own words. For the first time that morning, Lila looked unsure. She glanced at the clock, then at Monica, then at my badge on the desk. She asked what I planned to do. I said I planned to tell the truth in whatever room they called me into, and that if they preferred I stay silent, they should remember that documents and dates did not stay silent forever. 10 minutes later, I was in the boardroom. The long table was half full. Owen sat with his laptop open. Priya watched a live dashboard feed on a side screen. A large display at the end of the room showed the countdown to 1:30, and beside it, a video window with Marcus and his team from Horizon Capital. Lila entered behind us, more stiff than usual. Monica took a chair near the wall. Lila opened the call by talking about transformation. She said we were minutes away from a historic cutover. Marcus listened with his calm face. When she finished, he asked if operations and technology leaders fully endorsed the risk level. He used the word risk in a slow, deliberate way. Lila said yes. Then he asked me directly, by name, what I thought. I did not raise my voice. I said that I had not endorsed a single cutover without rollback. I said that in internal meetings over the past months, I had flagged repeated near misses and requested safer sequencing. I mentioned my dated notes, the facility incident logs, and the times my questions about rollback had been minimized. I kept it short. I added that HR had also tied my future at the company to how enthusiastically I supported this plan. Owen looked up sharply at that. Priya's face went a little pale. Marcus did not react outwardly. He simply asked Owen and Priya if my description matched their internal records. After a moment, both said that my concerns had been raised, that some had been softened in summaries, and that rollback had indeed been removed to keep the story clean. At 1:30, the cutover command went through. We all watched the dashboards. For a minute, nothing dramatic happened. Then one region froze, then another. Queues stacked. Status lights flipped from green to yellow to red across the map. On one screen, camera feeds from a warehouse locked with pallets mid-air on a conveyor. In the lender window, I saw Marcus lean forward. He did not shout. He simply said that, from where he sat, this looked exactly like the scenario I had described, and that the timeline I mentioned would be very important to any review of management's representations. He asked the board chair whether the company had retaliated against a protected internal critic on the morning of launch. Lila started to say that I was negative and resistant. Owen cut in, voice tight, and said that whatever else happened, the record would show I had tried to slow this down. The room shifted then. Questions turned toward Lila. Why no rollback? Why fire operations leadership an hour before launch? Why were lender decks cleaner than internal test notes? Monica tried to talk about culture. No one listened. The board chair, appearing in another window, said there would be an immediate investigation and that leadership actions around the cutover and HR pressure would be part of it. When the call ended, the dashboards were still red. The board chair asked me, quietly, if I would help stabilize the network for the next few hours while they sorted out the rest. I said I would help teams on the floor, but I would not stand in front of any camera to excuse decisions I had opposed. Then I picked up my badge from the table, feeling its small weight in my hand. As I walked out of the boardroom, my personal phone vibrated in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. Daniel's name and number glowed there, one new call coming in while the company I had held together for 17 years tried to explain to its lenders how a bad vibe had just turned into a very real crash.